Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers, here to talk Seahawks football and some big news hitting today. The biggest news of all, really. Seahawks decided to part ways with longtime head coach Pete Carroll and move into a different era of Seahawks football. And it's the end of one era and the beginning of another. And we don't know exactly where this is going to lead, but it's definitely going to send us into a different trajectory than we've been on for the last 13 years. Lots to talk about today, probably some great memories, some bad stuff, some good stuff, all of it. And glad you're joining us. Welcome in, Keith.
Yeah, this huge news and kind of unexpected. I know that people will say, oh, they expected whatever because this season and it's, I think people wanted this to be true, but there's a difference between wanting a change and expecting a change. And Pete Carroll, having taken the team to 2 of its 3 Super Bowls in its history, the only one in its history, winning record in all but 3 seasons. And in one of those 3 seasons, they made the playoffs anyway. And 2 of those seasons were in his first 2 years with the team. There was some thought that he was going to get to go out on his terms. And it sounds like that didn't happen. It also sounds like, his quote was that he competed to try and stay the coach, but ultimately, he agreed to step down as coach. He is still the executive vice president of football operations. Keep that in mind. I don't
think so. I don't think that he is. It wasn't real clear there. It was kind of muddled a little bit, but it sounded like that job is going to go to current general manager John Schneider.
It does, but all of the text of the press releases and everything that have come from the Seahawks says that he is stepping down as head coach, not his responsibility. Now, that might be true. They might be transitioning that. I know that Pete said that his role with the franchise has not been determined. Like, they don't know what his job responsibilities are going to be going forward, that he is still going to be with the team in some capacity. But at least, and I think,
here's the deal. John Schneider's going to be in charge of the new coaching search. He's going to be in charge of all personnel decisions, etc.
Yep. I
think this is, I got a lot of thoughts around this whole thing, but first of all, I want to tell everybody we planned on coming into this show to do a recap kind of the last game a little bit and of this season more or less, and then trying to transition into some of the things that we're going to be looking at this off season as we move forward. And then this news dropped, kind of changed everything. Keith and I really haven't had a chance to even talk about what we're going to talk about today on this show. We just kind of come into these things normally, and we're both prepared, and we kind of do our thing. And today we really don't know what we're going to talk about. But one of the things that I found interesting, Keith, and you mentioned, him not being able to go out on his own terms. I think in a sense he did, though. And you take a look at the press conference, and I watched it. While he did say that he fought for his coaching life, essentially, and for his coaches and for his players and for the culture and the franchise and so forth moving forward. I don't think that he could have done that any other way. There's no other way for him to do that. So I think that argument would have been there, even if he was 90, he would have wanted to be doing this. And so I think he did go out kind of on his own terms, and his own terms were, I'm going to fight to the end, and you're going to have to make me leave. And they did. And hats off to the ownership group that made this decision, Jody Allen, Burt Cold, and company. It's a hard decision. They've shown, I think, that they don't hesitate when they need to make tough choices. They moved on from Russell Wilson at the right time. They made that choice to stick with Pete Carroll and John Schneider over Russell Wilson. They, if you look at the Portland Trail Blazers, they moved on from Terry Stotts as a head coach when they felt like they needed to, and now this decision with Pete Carroll. So I think there's that eliminates question marks that we had over the ownership group. The whole Pete Carroll thing, it's tough because my personal choice was that I think I wanted to have Pete stay one more season, kind of finish out his contract, maybe make some changes in the coaching staff, particularly with Clint Hurt at defensive coordinator, and kind of run this thing back at least one more time. And in retrospect, and I've thought about this kind of this afternoon, the last 3 hours since the news conference between then and pushing record, that I've kind of come to terms with this as being the right move at the right time. There was never going to be a good time. It was always going to be difficult. It was always going to be a little awkward because, well, it's Pete. Mm-hmm. And he deserves the respect. He deserves the honor of what he's brought to the city and the franchise and football in general and in the NFL. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Fame coach.
Oh, yeah.
And there was going to be no easy way to kind of to do this. And they just kind of decided to pull the Band-Aid off and do it. That the reality is, on the ground, on the football field, Seattle's been mediocre the last 3 or 4 seasons. Their defenses have taken a step back for 7 or 8 seasons consecutively. And I don't think that you can be satisfied as a fan, as an owner of a franchise, if you're just mediocre, if you're just average. And I think they aspired to be more than that. And this decision needed to be made, and it was made, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean, the team still won 60% of its games under Pete. They were 10-9 in the playoffs under Pete, which no one has a winning record in the playoffs because, most of the time it's one loss and you're done. You know what I mean? So it's like just the way the playoffs are. Like being close to 500 in the playoffs is good. And he was 10-9. So the winningest coach in franchise history, brought us the only Super Bowl championship. Like I said, over 60% of his games were won. And he just changed
2
the
NFC
culture.
championships. Yeah.
Just changed the culture. Took the entire franchise was a disaster with Tim Ruskell running Mike Holmgren out of town, even though Mike Holmgren had kind of aged himself out of a job, but turning, the whole coach in waiting thing, which trashed the locker room and people didn't even know who to talk to. And then just an awful season the following with a completely incompetent head coach who couldn't control a locker room. Like the whole franchise was just in disarray. And they hired Pete Carroll, which wasn't necessarily a popular decision because of, things happening at USC where he had been coaching the last couple of years. And by couple, I mean like 10. But they brought him in not to just be a coach and X's and O's and all that. They brought him in, change the culture of the team and get everyone in the front office and the coaching staff on the same page, get guys in the locker room that wanted to win, willing to put in the work that was required to win, and really just create a winning culture. And he did that. And he did that throughout his time here. And people can say, oh, it hadn't worked. He's had he's had one losing season since 2011. That's it. Right? He has only had a losing season in 3 years. The first 2 years as a head coach when he had to completely overhaul the roster, like literally every spot on the roster. And then the 1 year in 2021 when Russ got hurt and the team was a mess. Made the playoffs last year, almost made the playoffs this year. It's hard to go and say, oh, they're mediocre and all of that. I get that over the last 3 years, they, they're one game under 500 over the last 3 years. They've only won one playoff game since 2016. You can use that, that as a way, but they were also 12-4 in 2020, 11-5 in 2019, right? These were not, those were not bad football teams in that span.
Yeah.
I think that anyone who's saying that Pete's not a good coach or hasn't done a good job, I can't agree with that. I just can't get behind the logic.
I do agree.
He's a good coach.
I do agree with that. Yeah, I agree.
I think he's a great coach.
I think he's the greatest coach in Seattle sports history.
Yeah.
By a wide margin. He's the 15th winningest all-time NFL coach,
which is crazy to me considering he has spent most of his career in college.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. There was no push from us on this show. Probably one of the few shows that really kind of gave Pete the leeway, I think, that he earned and deserved. And, not all of this was on Pete, some of it was choices Pete made for defensive coordinators, et cetera, coming, internal moves and so forth. I think that kind of doomed him. Mm-hmm. You can make an argument that his loyalty to a fault was kind of what nipped him, in the end, I think maybe. But as far as being a coach, a human being, a leader of men, a leader of people in and outside of the organization, a motivator, I think that you're going to see in the next week, if you're really paying attention to the Pete Carroll news out there, you're going to see player after coach after media personality have nothing but good things to say about this human being. And I think this is a testament to himself, the way he carries himself, the way he treats other people. And I will personally forever be indebted to him as the coach of this team, as a team that I've been following since I was 11 years old, since the very first game in the Kingdom that I attended in 1976. And so it's a team and a franchise, just part of me. It's in my blood. I can't get it out. It is. And Pete is just right there at the top as far as somebody that I admire and respect and hold admiration for, not just for coaching, my franchise, but just in the way that he coaches, in the way that he treats people, is just somebody that shows by example of how you do it right. And so anyway, I'm thankful for that.
If we are going to look at why this move was made, this move was made in large part because he couldn't hire a defensive coordinator. Clint Hurt, I'm sorry. He sounds like a great guy. He was a good defensive line coach, but he was not a good defensive coordinator. And you go look at when Pete was trying to figure out who was going to be the defensive coordinator after letting Ken Norton go. He had his hand in a lot of cookie jars trying to figure out which one he wanted. Never really made a decision lost Donatel, who was probably easily the most qualified and probably the best choice because he simply wouldn't make a commitment. Ended up with a Hurt Desai combination that didn't work, and both of them have lost their jobs this year. One was Seattle, and the other one is the defensive coordinator in Philadelphia. Both of them have lost their jobs. Now,
we should mention that the coaching staff in Seattle was given word that they were free to look at other coaching opportunities in the NFL.
Yeah, because
so they're
the
all
next
under
coach who
contract.
comes in is going to hire their own staff. Now, some of those guys might be still in Seattle. They might come in and like when Pete came in, it was kind of surprising. He decided to keep Gus Bradley as his defensive coordinator. And so those kind of things happen, but whoever it is that comes in is going to bring their own guy. And if it's the person who I think most of us want it to be and think it will be, then he's going to want new defensive coaches because they're going to run a different scheme. They're not going to run the scheme that Seattle tried to run this year. Notice I said tried to run because they didn't really run a scheme this year. Their defense was bad from a schematic point of view. And they're going to be switching most likely. And how many of these guys are going to stick around? This isn't what they know. This isn't what they coach. They're going to, I expect them to be new guys. On the offensive side of the ball, I could see some of the guys returning. I could see a lot of the guys returning.
I'm hopeful for a couple of guys returning, actually. Like Cunningham on the offensive line, I thought did a really good job for what he had to work with this year.
I thought it was Dickerson who was the offensive
Dickerson, line. Sorry. I don't know why I said Cunningham. Yeah, I mean, that leads to a whole new line of thought on this whole thing is when you ask for Pete's firing and you get it, what comes with that? Well, we're about to find out because it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot, potentially. You're going to have a new coach. You're going to have new coordinators. You're probably going to want a guy that's going to want his own personnel in, as throughout the entire coaching tree on the staff. You're going to have Geno Smith and Drew Lock at quarterback are both out of contract. Not Geno, but guy may want his own guy in there, right?
Geno will be out of contract shortly.
And you've just got a whole roster, Keith, that's going to be under examination as far as do these guys play in the style that I need for my scheme, and
without Pete there to protect him, I have no expectation of Geno Smith being around.
I don't know about that, Keith. I think
by the time the first day of the league year ends, I just don't.
By all accounts, I'm gonna argue with that just for a half a second. By all accounts, Geno Smith is really liked well across the league and respected. And if you go look at the advanced stats on him, he's easily a top 12 quarterback by any statistical measure. If you take a look at the grit he showed on the comeback stats that he had in leading drives at the end of games to try to either, put this team in a position to win, et cetera, showed that he was clutch over and over again. And I think that, Geno has something there that I don't think we give him enough credit for. And I think that he would be a good addition to a young team that is in a rebuild mode, which this team could certainly turn into.
Geno only got an opportunity to become a starter after the long absence of him being a starter because of Pete Carroll. He only got a job. He only got a chance to come back and stay in Seattle because of Pete Carroll. And now he's got a contract which does not fit his skill level. And any other coach that comes in knows that as a coach, you are dependent on your quarterback to keep your job. No coach coming in, if they've got other options, is going to tie their career's future to a 34-year-old Geno Smith coming off a mediocre season.
I think other options, quote unquote, is the key to that statement. And we shall see what that brings. Now, if you draft a young guy at 16 overall if you move up 5 spots or whatever it is. Excuse me. You're going to want a veteran quarterback. Now, if you don't have Geno Smith, you better have somebody else. And that somebody else is probably going to start games for you in 2024, regardless of whether you like Geno Smith or not. You got to have somebody competent to run the ship there for you in the first year of your coaching tenure. And you probably don't want it to be a number 16 pick in the draft.
You're not spending $30 million.
Well, if you take a look at,
Geno.
okay, so I'll make the argument for Geno, and I'm not saying I believe this one way or the other. Geno's, if you take a look at the stats, he hovers around 12 on a lot of different stats. So I'm going to just say he's the 12th best quarterback in the NFL. You go look at all the contracts out there, and he's the 12th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. So when those two things marry up, he's paid about what he's worth. I'm just saying in general terms, Keith.
This year, he's paid about what he's worth. His contract doubles.
No. I mean at 31 million. I'm talking at 31 million. That's the average. That's the 12th highest paid quarterback in the NFL at 31. That's his next year's deal. So I'm just saying that's just where he's at that's how expensive quarterbacks are in the NFL. It's not a great situation. I'm just saying that's what it is.
Geno Smith was a free agent last year. He could have signed anywhere. He had one team interested in his services.
I agree, but I think over time he's proven himself to be a quarterback that's worthy of starting in the NFL somewhere. At least
maybe, but he had
as a bridge quarterback.
He had one team interested in his services last year. And the reason why they were interested in his services was Pete Carroll and Pete Carroll's belief in him. You take Pete Carroll from this situation, or, away from that situation.
And I think Pete Carroll was proven correct in believing in Geno Smith.
I think he was proved correct a year ago. I think now, not so much.
There are limitations.
His first year with Geno, absolutely. Second year with Geno regressed. He has not been the guy that Pete Carroll said he was, and what we thought he was after, the first 10 games of the 2022 season.
I'll say this. He did regress in every statistical category that contributed to his bonus.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't make one of those bonus numbers.
He didn't make any of his incentives.
That's my concession. But I will say this. The offense had the 28th lowest amount of drives in the NFL. And part of that reason was because the defense was so bad, the offense couldn't get on the field. And when the offense did get on the field, the defense
wasn't worse this year than last year.
Yeah, it was. It went from 21st to 29th overall.
In yards, but not in terms of possessions and points and
in points
time
they
of
were
possession.
The same. In points they were the same. Time of possession about the same or slightly worse.
The difference was that this year they didn't string together drives. They didn't convert on third down. They didn't move the ball.
You're correct.
The defense
and I'm not putting all of that on
The defense was terrible
Geno.
both years, but Geno and the offense was worse in year 2.
I'm not going to put it all on Geno, and I think you put.
I'm not either. I'm not saying it is
larger
all
proportion
on
of it on Geno.
I'm just saying if you are a head coach coming in, we're going to talk in a minute about some head coaching possibilities.
Sure.
If you're a head coach coming in, what loyalty do you have to Geno Smith when you know you can get equal?
There's zero loyalty.
Yeah, you can re-sign Drew Lock for $4 or $5 million and get the same quality of production.
What I'm going to say is when you go take a look at all the options that are available in free agency at the quarterback spot, as you know, it's never a very pretty sight. Now, Geno's under contract, and maybe they can rework some of that stuff to make it more advantageous for him to be on this roster next year as a bridge quarterback to whatever they draft or future or whatever. And I think you can win with Geno. I think they've proven that in this league. You can go to the playoffs. You can get above 500 with Geno. The defense was awful, Keith. Awful.
It was awful.
If that defense goes from 29th to like 15th even, Geno Smith looks a lot better in this equation because they
He
win
does not.
11 or 12 games.
No,
under
he
Geno
doesn't
Smith.
look better. The team looks
Pete.
better because the team has more wins, and people look at the win and loss record and they go, "Oh, it must be the quarterback," and they give Geno
and he's
credit
got
for
more opportunities, and with more opportunities, he's got more big plays, and with more big plays, he got more touchdowns and more yards.
Really, because
what
was his big play? What was the big play percentage this year versus last year?
It was not.
Oh, that's right. It's less than half. Giving him more opportunities wasn't going to improve his efficiency. It was going to lead to more third down failures because that's all Seattle did this year on offense.
And you can take a look, and a lot of that blame has to do with poor play on first and second down. So they were just not as good this year. But if you take a look at the offense in general, it wasn't the problem. They were the 11th best EPA offense in the league this year.
The offense
11th.
absolutely was a problem. It wasn't the problem. It was a problem.
Right.
The offense was terrible. It had one of the worst third down
this offense
conversion
with one of the worst defense in the league. It had one of the 9
worst
games this year.
Red zone conversion efficiencies. It had it was in the top 5 in terms of 3 and outs on the year. It was the lowest time of possession offense in the entire league. The offense was, to say the offense wasn't a problem is just factually incorrect.
I'm not saying it wasn't a problem. I'm saying it wasn't the biggest problem.
It wasn't the problem, but it was a major problem. The defense was a bigger problem, and that's why the coaching staff, especially the defensive coaching staff, needs to be shown the door because they were
anytime
awful.
You can win 9 games with what you're saying is a major problem as an offense, when you have literally almost the worst in some categories, the very worst defense in the NFL that does absolutely nothing well, and you still win 9 games, I'd say your offense is probably did about as good as it could do. Because in order for the offense to do better and be more efficient, I think the defense needed to be better. I think that's my position.
Teams
I get
with quarterbacks that maybe won't even be in the league next year, not even as backups starting, had better third down conversion percentages than Seattle. Granted, that's because everybody had a better third down conversion percentage than Seattle. You're gonna have.
I love this argument that you and I are having because it's perfect. It's like our biggest argument of the year, and it's just over this little thing.
The defense was terrible, but giving the offense any leeway for being awful itself, simply because the defense was worse, is not a way that you're going to go forward and win games.
The
offense is the problem
agree with
the defense is worse, but the offense wasn't good.
I actually agree with you on the offense, but I think it's misplaced a little bit. I think that I would personally rank the blame on the offense as number 1, the offensive line being injured. I think that had a lot to do with it. And 2, Shane Waldron. I think there's just something there where there was a disconnect between what Pete really wanted to do and control the clock, exert will, etc. with the run game did not happen. Even though you go look at the advanced stats like on Ken Walker and stuff, our running attack, when we did run, we were ranked really fairly decently. We just didn't do it enough. And so anyway, I think those things contributed as well. That's why I'm taking a little bit of heat off of Geno. I agree with you, though, that Geno is not the quarterback of the future, the guy. He's not the guy. Yeah,
he's not the quarterback of the future. And if you are a new coach coming in, that's what I'm saying is we're in the middle of a coaching change. This show is about a coaching change. If you're the middle of a coaching stuff, you know that Geno is not the guy of the future. He wasn't really the guy. If you're going to draft the guy at 16, who would you want to be the quarterback? Would you throw a guy that was drafted at 16? Let's say it's Penix. Would you throw Penix out as a rookie on a new coach team, or would you rather have Geno Smith back there for that first year? I'd rather have Drew Lock back there at $5 million. So that's going to be 1/6 of the price. You're going to get the same guy. Production wise, he's not maybe not the leader that Geno Smith was, but he's the same guy production-wise at 1/6 of the price. You get equal production at 1/6 of the price. Why would you not make that change? If you're a new coach coming
there is very little statistical evidence to back up that claim.
Except for the fact that both of them played this year and the offense was equally inept with both of them.
Drew Lock played one game.
He did not play one game. He played in 4 games.
He played 1.5 or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
He played in 4 games this year, and the offense.
Move on to talk about.
Let's look at the future.
Yeah. So Pete's gone. This team is completely blown up now. We don't know what we don't know, but we can pretty much theorize that we're going to have a new coach. We're probably going to have a new offensive and defensive coordinator, and we're going to probably have a new quarterback, and we're probably going to have like tons of new players, and it's not going to look the same at all. It's just going to be crazy. But for now, let's kind of go through it in some sort of logical way. Let's talk about coaching candidates. Who's out there? Let's just talk about who's out there. Some of the younger guys, some of the guys that are established that are probably top of the list, top of mind for most fans. I think Dan Quinn comes to mind for everybody at first, top of the list. Cowboys defensive coordinator, has history with Seattle.
Seattle's defensive coordinator during both Super Bowl years under Pete. The defense has never been as good as it was those 2 years with him there. Even with Chris Richard, who was what we've learned is a decent defensive coordinator. After that, just no. So
what do you think about Dan Quinn, Keith?
What?
What do you think about Dan Quinn?
I would hire Dan Quinn yesterday to be the head coach of Seattle. Now that Pete's gone, he knows Seattle.
So he's a defensive-minded guy. He's not an offensive guy. The last 4 or 5.
I don't need an offensive guy.
The last 4 or 5 offensive coaches have won Super Bowls.
I know a guy that can come in and establish or maintain a winning culture and do the things. Dan Quinn was a guy that went to Atlanta after leaving Seattle, took them to a Super Bowl, had a lead in the Super Bowl, lost the lead because the guy who's currently the head coach in San Francisco decided to stop running the ball in the second half despite a giant lead.
What would you say if Dan Quinn wanted Brian Schottenheimer as his offensive coordinator?
That would be hard. That would be hard for me to stomach simply because Brian Schottenheimer is a bad offensive coordinator, but he's an awesome quarterback coach. And when the Seahawks hired Brian Schottenheimer, it wasn't for his ability to be an offensive coordinator. It was for his ability to fix Russell Wilson, and he did. And the reason why the Cowboys hired Brian Schottenheimer to be their offensive coordinator was because they wanted to fix Dak Prescott, and he did. So if Dan Quinn wants to hire Brian Schottenheimer, who's your quarterback? That's the only question. Who's your quarterback? Because if you're bringing Brian Schottenheimer in, it's because you want him to work with your quarterback because he's the best quarterback coach in the league. Maybe one of the best quarterback coaches in the last 40 years. But he's a crummy offensive coordinator. If he wants to bring in Schottenheimer, do it. But because there's a plan about making your quarterback really good, and if you make your quarterback really good, you're going to be fine. I don't like Schottenheimer, but no one is going to disparage his ability to work with a quarterback and make a quarterback look good because that's what he does best.
Okay, so there's Dan Quinn, and he's kind of the known quantity. We don't really need to talk too much about him. He currently is under contract.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks don't have an agreement with him.
Here's the situation. Well, I want to talk to you about that. Let's come back to that. There is a situation where Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, has talked openly about valuing Dan Quinn and wanting him to remain on the team, and question marks around Mike McCarthy a little bit as head coach. And if Mike McCarthy doesn't take them deep into the playoffs, he would fire McCarthy and install Dan Quinn as head coach.
Mm-hmm.
These are just speculative rumors at this point, but for whatever that's worth, it would.
I think while those rumors are speculative, I think they're safe.
Yeah. So we'll have to watch that. So Dan might not be available for 2 or 3 weeks. And if the Seahawks want to make a move quickly, and based on the fact that they fired Pete 2 days after this, 3 days now after the season, it may indicate that they have somebody in mind to me, or that they have a plan. They have a plan. Because they just don't willy-nilly fire their head coach without a plan.
Yeah, they have a plan.
So they've been thinking about this for like weeks, So let's talk about a couple other people, or as many as we want. Ben Johnson, Lions offensive coordinator. He's one of the young guns out there. 37-year-old Ben Johnson is one of the flashy names leading the Lions offense, which has been 12-5 this year. He's turned Goff into some sort of miracle worker at quarterback. I don't even know how that happens. We all know about Jared Goff.
So mediocre, right? In the past.
So now
it looks
now
like
this. So
great. Yeah. Honestly, the only problem that I would have with that is how much of that is him and how much of that is Dan Campbell. I would question that. And also, he's 37. He's never had an opportunity to lead a team. You've never seen him in that role. You've never seen him to manage a culture of a franchise the way that Pete Carroll did. And
yeah, I mean, Sean McVay started somewhere like that. So did,
Of course, but Sean McVay also was going to a team in the Rams that were pathetic on all sides of the ball and in the front office and just in general. They were not a good franchise. They were a franchise that was stumbling around, not knowing where to go. And they hired the right guy. And he took the Rams to a Super Bowl. Hiring a guy like Johnson coming out of that is a potential home run hire. It's also a potential disaster. If you're already an established culture team, you're one of those franchises that knows that is run well and knows what they're doing. You don't go to a guy like that.
It doesn't seem wise.
That is the dice roll that a team like the Washington Commanders, that are just an absolute disaster, does. Hoping
I don't know that Washington's an absolute disaster.
They're a disaster.
I think they're one of the coveted teams, though, that coaches would want to go to.
Yeah, I don't believe that in the slightest.
Really?
I get that now that Dan Snyder's gone, they're more like any coach that went there when Dan Snyder was there deserved to be fired, because why would you take a job to work for the worst person in the world?
Let me ask you this. How about Eric Bieniemy, Washington, D.C. Offensive coordinator?
I love Eric Bieniemy. I think the fact that he hasn't had a head coaching job yet is a sign that there's still race problems in the NFL coaching world. I think that the guy can flat coach an offense as good as anyone in the NFL. But again, you're talking about a guy that you don't know, and you don't know how he can manage a team, and you know that there were problems in Washington this year with players and him, to the fact that the players went to their head coach about it, having problems with him, and their head coach admitted to that and talked about it to the press. Again, great guy, great coach. He should go to San Diego, or not San Diego, LA, the Chargers, a team that's a mess, that if they hit on a coach, they'll be in great shape. Seattle's different. Seattle's different in that it's got a culture of winning. You don't. So let me talk to you nothing.
So there's two coaches then, 2 or 3 maybe.
There's two coaches that I would consider right now.
How about Mike Vrabel or Mike
That's the
McDonald,
other
the
one.
Ravens defensive coordinator?
Mike Vrabel is the guy. If you can't get Dan Quinn, if Dan Quinn has said no, and then suddenly today the Titans gave you a gift if you are the Seahawks by firing a really good head coach who has done some freaking crazy things with a fairly untalented roster. And then they fired him because the roster was terrible and he could only win so many games with an awful roster. And they had
injuries like crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Mike Vrabel is one of the better coaches in the league. I said that when the Seahawks played the Titans. He is a good freaking coach.
He's a good coach. He's got a good culture.
Yeah. Tennessee's got a great culture. You know, he can manage that. He's a good coach. The players play hard for him. What they don't have is a general manager who can create a roster.
Yeah. That's why I think John Schneider and Mike Vrabel would actually be a really good working partnership.
I would love that. Mike Vrabel being fired today, it happened today, is a gift if you are the Seahawks, because that would be a great hire. Dan Quinn is your home run hire. I think he'd be the perfect person. If you can't get Quinn because he's like, I don't want to commit yet because there's a chance I could take over this job with this team that's further along in the process, and Jerry Jones is going to pay me more. Okay, go get Mike Vrabel, because that's a home run hire too. It's just, instead of a 3-run homer, it's a 2-run homer, if you want to use the baseball analogy. I have a lot of respect for Mike Vrabel. The other one that you mentioned was the defensive coordinator of Baltimore, and he is in the same boat to me as Eric Bieniemy. Absolute great coordinator. Like just straight up, or the Lions offensive coordinator, great coordinator. You know, they know football. They know X's and O's. They can coach. Can they run a team? Can they run a program? Are you willing to bet on them enough that you're willing to risk the fact that Seattle, which has an established, positive, amazing culture, because Pete Carroll does this thing and is good, are you willing to bet that culture on unknown quantity?
You know, here's my thought on that. Potentially. You don't rule it out if you're going to do a sweeping search. I've heard tell that Seahawks plan on doing that. You bring these guys in for an interview. And the reason that you bring them in for an interview is you just want to get to know them. Like, you want to get to know them. You want to be able to talk to them at the combine later. You want to be able to have relationships with these guys, to be able to initiate trade talks and discussions wherever they land in the future and so forth. So you're just kind of keeping those channels open, establishing relationships, etc. So that's one view of this process. And then you settle on your coach fairly quickly. You know, I would imagine Seattle probably has a head coach within 2 weeks.
I would be willing. The only reason why they wouldn't is if they already have a deal in place for Dan Quinn and they're just waiting, because they can't do anything.
Yeah,
they can't do anything.
Possible.
They can't do anything officially with Dan Quinn for a while, but they already know Dan Quinn. They already know who he is. They already know what he is. They already know what he would do. They already know Dan Quinn inside and out, and Dan Quinn knows the Seahawks inside and out. So if they have asked Dan Quinn's agent, they can't talk to Dan Quinn, but they can talk to Dan Quinn's agent. And if Dan Quinn's agent says, yeah, of course he'd want to be there, and they've already like established the fact that they may already have an agreement in place with his agent that the moment he becomes available to sign, he signs with Seattle. That would be a reason why you move on from Pete Carroll right now. Because you already know. You've already had that conversation. You don't need to interview the guy, because you already know who he is. He was here.
How does that work with the requirements of the NFL to go through a process?
The process is the process. All you have to do, the Seahawks interviewed, pick a person. They could interview freaking Clint Hurt, who honestly would be fired even if Pete Carroll was still in, and say that it was a head coaching interview and the process is taken care of.
So there's a couple of names I'll just throw out there. How about like Brian Flores, the Vikings defensive coordinator, used to be a head coach at Miami, got kind of forced out, went to Pittsburgh for a season, ended up on the Vikings, turned around the Vikings defense pretty nicely this year.
He's a good coach. He is a good coach. He did a good job in Miami. He was the guy that took a disaster of our franchise and started the work that established the culture that Mike McDaniels has been able to continue and turn into a winning football team. Players love him. And there's a lot to like there.
How about Steve Wilkes, the 49ers defensive coordinator? These are just names, but they're going to be names that are going to come up. I wouldn't
even interview him.
How about Jim Harbaugh, Keith?
There's the one I've been waiting for you to come to.
I figured.
Okay, I'll be straight up honest. I dislike Jim Harbaugh a lot, and it's
almost as much as you disliked Pete Carroll coming out of USC.
Oh, I dislike Jim Harbaugh more because I don't like him personally. Pete Carroll, I've always known was a great guy. I didn't think he was a fit for an NFL franchise because I didn't think the things that he did that worked really well at USC, I didn't think would work in the NFL. And I was wrong, and I'll admit that. Jim Harbaugh's an asshole. There isn't a single person who's worked for him that likes him.
He looks like an asshole.
He is an asshole.
Let's just be honest. But he's a good coach.
He's a great coach, but he's an asshole. And every single person that's ever worked with him or he's worked for will tell you, God damn, he's freaking hard to work with. But you put up with him because of the results. I really don't like Jim Harbaugh. I wouldn't be against Seattle hiring him. You have to know going in, you're getting 4 years. If you're expecting more than 4 years out of Jim Harbaugh, you're lying to yourself. But you're going to get 4 damn good years of coaching.
I would love and hate this hire if it should happen. I just don't see it happening because of the relationships that John Schneider has with Pete Carroll and what Pete Carroll has with Jim Harbaugh. And
Jim Harbaugh, I don't think will leave Michigan
work.
A week after winning a national title.
I think that he would consider leaving, and I think that he would love to come to Seattle only to play the 49ers twice a year.
Oh, he would love that.
Right. He needs to play 15 other games in a season, though.
The only other team, only other place that he would want to go in the NFL more than Seattle or any place to play 49ers twice a year is somewhere in the AFC East where he could play freaking Trent Baalke's team, who's the general manager in Jacksonville twice a year, because he fucking hates Baalke, and he has every reason to hate Baalke. Baalke's a terrible human being.
He destroyed his roster.
Both of those people are not good humans. One is a damn good coach that I don't like personally for a lot of different reasons, and we can go into those. That's a whole show. We want to talk about all the things I don't like about Jim Harbaugh, but he's a damn good coach. And if he got hired in Seattle, I would hate it and freaking love it because he's going to win a Super Bowl. You give him 4 years. He will take an already good roster and good culture, and he will freaking win there within those 4 years. And then he'll wear out his welcome and need to go elsewhere. and you need to be ready to make that transition.
It's interesting, in time, as guys get older, sometimes they mellow out a little bit. You just never know. This has been a really interesting show, a show that I was not anticipating having when I woke up this morning.
I wasn't anticipating to have it when I had lunch this afternoon.
Yeah, right? I had a whole other show planned, other notes taken, etc. I had no notes for this, basically just coming in cold, which is fine. We are going to have quite a few shows probably in the next 2 weeks just to sort things out. I know that we're going to have a show with Dan Viennes from Seahawks Forever podcast. Come on, a friend of the show, been on our show several times over the years. And
he's been on our show a number of times. We've been on his show a number of times. Great guy.
And we're actually doing a trade where I'm giving him access to our audio and video files, and he's going to be able to post it on his own show and own website as well. So
cool.
We'll all be hosts on that show. We'll probably just go back and forth. It'll be great because just have another perspective come on and talk about this stuff, kind of figure it out. I'll try to work out some sort of outline that makes sense that we can kind of work off of. But it's we're kind of almost stuck now. We kind of could move forward a little bit. We could talk about players. Who would you like to keep? Who would you want to go? I had a whole list of free agents. So much of that
depends on the coach that's hired.
Yeah, I had a whole list of free agents that we were going to talk about as far as our own. Like, do we keep? Do we retain? Who do we pay? Who do we not pay?
So much of that depends on the coach that's hired.
Yeah, yeah. So now we're kind of just in this no man's land for a minute. It'll be interesting to see how that works itself out.
Well, I don't think there's another person I'd rather be in no man's land with than my co-host here in Bill, because we've been doing this now. We're going into our 8th off season. What you said last time, which eighth
season begins in February. Yeah, the second week of February.
So we're essentially done with 7 years on this show, and that's incredible. But you're right.
We've been doing this for half of Pete Carroll's tenure. And and it's the only coach we've had since we started this.
Yep.
I was looking at the coaching situation for the Seahawks, and did you know that 33 of the past 41 NFL seasons, the Seahawks have had either Chuck Knox, Mike Holmgren, and Pete Carroll as a coach, and they've won. Chuck Knox is the 11th overall winningest coach in the NFL. Mike Holmgren is the 19th winningest coach, and Pete Carroll is the 15th winningest coach. If you go look at the franchise, we've literally only had 7 head coaches in our entire franchise's history, not counting Mike McCormick, which was like a half a season.
Yeah, don't count the interim guys. Just count the guys that were there.
But literally, 7 guys in 45, 46 years. I mean, you go look at any other franchise, they've got head coaches, their lists are a mile long. It's crazy.
And
you can do the same thing with quarterbacks.
Jim Mora in that group of 7 that only coached 1 year and was crap.
Right.
And Tom Flores, who was a great coach in Oakland and was hired specifically to trash Seattle so they could move to LA, and did a very good job of trashing Seattle. And so you take out those 2 guys who had
and the other guy, the Miami Hurricanes coach, Oregon State
Dennis
coach,
Erickson.
Dennis Erickson.
Dennis Erickson is one, and then the guy that started it all, back in the very beginning, who got fired because he couldn't.
Had a soft spot for Jack Patera, though.
Yeah, but he let his personal feelings get in the way of union stuff and talk and what was going on in the football field. And he was not a guy that allowed the union thing to play out and not let it affect what happened on the football field. He deserved to be fired. I'm sorry. I know you had a soft spot for him his first year, but
his first coach. Yeah. But anyway. So, I mean, we've had a tremendous amount of success though. In 33 of the past 41 NFL seasons, Chuck Knox, Mike Holmgren, Pete Carroll coached this team.
those are the 7 coaches. There's only been 7. The only other team out there that has been like that, where you just have continuity,
It's Pittsburgh.
a lot, is Pittsburgh, and they're better because they've been around for a lot longer and they've only had 3.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? That is a franchise that has done a good job of hiring coaches. And I know there are Pittsburgh fans that don't like Mike Tomlin because they don't see a Super Bowl coming and they think it's time to move on. And he might actually move on and pull a Sean Payton and take a year off and whatever. But they've only had 3 coaches in that entire franchise's history.
Yeah,
That's
the Seahawks.
impressive.
Well, the reason I mentioned that is the Seahawks have just been extremely fortunate and lucky to have that stability, not only in quarterback play. We've had some decent quarterbacks. In, like, you take a look at Matt Hasselbeck, and then we transitioned fairly quickly into Russell Wilson. In the last couple of years, it's been Geno, and Geno started all the games that he could start except for one. And I just think that's really kind of a testament to the coaches that we've had too, that the stability there. And so anyway, it all kind of ties together for me. So
Zorn, Craig,
this is a new era.
Hasselbeck, Wilson, right?
Yeah.
That's been the quarterback, the quarterbacks in Seattle, Zorn, Craig, Hasselbeck, and Wilson.
Yeah.
There's been a year here and a year there with other people, including the last year, or 2 years with Geno, but it's been those 4 guys, and it's been 7 coaches total.
Yeah.
And whoever it is going to be the 8th guy. If you couldn't tell from our conversation of the last 16 minutes, there's 2 guys in that thing that would be ecstatic for. And everyone else,
because you wouldn't want to settle for anything less. We talked about, I read Rob Staten's blog about some of the coaches that he would consider. And Ben Johnson was on the top of his list, along with the defensive coordinator from the Ravens, Mike McDonald. And those are both young guys, splashy guys. And I get that. And there's kind of a younger fan base on this team that kind of appreciates that movement, that youth movement in football. But if you want to win in the NFL, having a young guy like that doesn't guarantee success. And it's, you want to have that continuity, that culture.
You look at McVay in currently LA with the Rams, and then you look at currently Miami, right? With McDaniels there. Those are the guys that have come in that have been super young and done well. There's been a long list of guys that we forget about that were hired because they were the next great mind that bombed. I want a guy I know can develop a culture. Seattle has one. Can you maintain it? I know Vrabel can. I believe Dan Quinn can because I've seen him and what he did in Atlanta before the GM just destroyed the roster from underneath.
I think that Super Bowl loss really destroyed that too.
Well, and losing his offensive coordinator, that helped the offense do well, but then also sabotaged the Super Bowl, hurt him. But the roster fell apart underneath him, and he had no roster control. He was entirely at the mercy of his general manager, who did a bad job. So, but I look at what he did in Seattle and in Atlanta before the roster fell apart, and you look at what Vrabel has done with not a great roster, but has still managed a culture there. I'd take either, and I think anyone else is a big risk that could blow up in your face. And one of those young bright minds, like the guy from Detroit or Baltimore, great minds, they know football. but can they manage a team? Can they control a culture in the right way? I don't know. I saw the opposite of that, and that was Jim Mora.
So I got a question for you. You'd mentioned control of personnel and John Schneider. We didn't really talk about John Schneider today, but he emerged out of this big move for the Seahawks today as having more control over this team than any other personnel guy.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. And what kind of control do you give a new head coach?
I don't know. John Snyder's never had full control over his own roster. We don't know how many of the win now moves, the Jadeveon Clowney and like those kind of moves, were Pete Carroll moves or John Snyder moves, because Pete Carroll had final say over the roster. Not John Snyder. John Snyder had control over the scouting process, for the most part, the draft, but Pete Carroll could still be like, no, we should do this. And he had control. We've never seen what John Snyder's control of the roster would look like. I kind of want to see that. I like what John Snyder's done. I think that he's been hamstrung by win now moves that Pete Carroll has dictated. He also might have been really absolutely behind those win now moves, and they weren't Pete Carroll dictated, but more John Snyder going, hey, look at this cool shiny thing I can give you. We don't know, and we'll never know. But I kind of want to see what John Snyder can do.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what John Snyder can do with control. Would I give up some of that control to Dan Quinn to get him here?
Right.
Yes.
And or Mike Vrabel. It's both. They both had the similar situations happen to them.
Yeah. I mean, they're both guys that are good coaches that we know that can manage a culture and do the organizational things that a head coach has to do. That's not about X's and O's. We know those two guys can do it. That's why they're on the top of my list.
Yeah.
Because that's the biggest part for franchise success. It isn't X's and O's. It's that. And those guys, I believe, can do it. I don't know about the younger guys.
Yeah. Well, that's why they go through the process.
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll see. All right. Big show. Wow. Lots of news. Crazy. We'll be back. I don't know if we'll be back this week or not. We're definitely going to be back on Monday when we have Dan Fiennes on the show, and we'll just keep working through this stuff. This is crazy. So stick with us. It's going to be a great off season. We'll be here all off season up until the draft and then beyond. So, until then, you can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. We're also on Threads. You can find the show on Instagram and Facebook. You can also find us on your favorite podcast platform and our own YouTube channel. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.